Hi, this is Simon Upstell and welcome to this very basic introduction to creating a scene in Blender, and it's going to look like this. So I'm going to assume you're pretty much completely new to Blender, and I'm going to take things very gently, but you are going to learn quite a lot of useful stuff in this tutorial. So let's get started. So please make sure you have version 4 of Blender installed, because you will get confused otherwise. So when you open up Blender, you'll see this default setup and you'll have this default cube selected. And then what you're going to do is you're going to hit X on the keyboard, which brings up this menu. And you say, yes, I want to delete that cube. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add a UV sphere. So we're going to come to the Add menu, Mesh, and we're going to look for UV sphere. Now I want you to notice that whenever you perform an action, there is this little menu down here, which you can open up, which allows you to modify that action. So for example, if we wanted a different number of segments here, say 12, you'd be able to input that from here. But we're going to just stick with this default. So with this sphere selected, I'm going to come to View and Frame selected. But if you have a number pad, which I strongly recommend for using Blender, then you can hit the period key and it will do the same thing. So that's zoomed that object to the dimensions of the window. And what we can also do is come to View and Viewpoint and Front, and you'll notice that the shortcut for that is number 1 on the number pad. So now we're looking at the front view of the UV sphere, and what we're now going to do is we're going to switch into edit mode. So the default mode is object mode, but we're going to switch into edit mode, and the shortcut for that is the tab key. But let's just select it from the menu here, and you can see that all my vertices have been selected. They're all highlighted. And we have a little menu across here. That indicates that we've got vertices selected. If I switch to this one, that selects all the edges. And if I switch to the third one, that selects all the faces. Again, there's shortcuts for this, and that's numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the top row of numbers on your keyboard, so not the number pad in this instance. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm going to select the top view. So again, we can do it from the viewpoint, or we can hit 7 on the number pad. And I'm just going to draw around these faces here. So just that set in the middle. And then I'm going to hit X as before, and I'm going to select faces, and that deletes those faces. Then I'm going to come to View, Viewpoint, and Bottom, and I'm going to do the same. Select these faces, X on the keyboard, delete faces. And let's come back to the front viewpoint. Then what we're going to do, still in Faces mode, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and I'm going to click here, and that selects all of that row of faces. I'm clicking close to that edge deliberately. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key and the Alt key simultaneously. And I'm going to click here, and that selects that next row. Same thing here. Still holding down the Shift and Alt key. Select that. Still holding down the Shift and Alt key. Select this. So these are actually the faces I want to keep. So what I can do is I can come to Select and Invert, and now all the other faces are selected. And again, I can hit X on the keyboard and delete faces. So I want to slightly modify this resulting mesh, and I'm going to switch into the Edges mode. So this one here, again, that's number 2 on the top row of numbers on your keyboard. And again, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and click to select that row of edges this time, and hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this row of edges. So now we've got those two selected. Then I'm going to hit S, which is the scaling tool, and then X to select the X axis for the scale. And then I'm going to drag to the right gently like that to scale it out. And you can see again our little menu has popped up here. And I'm just going to set that number quite precisely to 1.35 since I have that option. So it's just kind of flattened off that set of faces there. You'll notice that I'm dragging with the middle mouse in the viewport, and that's allowing me to navigate around like that. So then I'm going to hit number 1 on the number pad, which gives us our front viewpoint. And I'm going to come down here to the material properties down there. And I'm going to click New. And then I'm going to click this button to add a new material slot and hit New again. So material 2, I shall call panels. I'm going to select material 1 and rename that as body. Just going to come back to the panels, and here under the base color, let's just make it rather obviously blue like that. Now what we need to do is we need to come over to this next tab here, this one at the top here, the viewport shading, which will allow us to see the materials. So select that. So I'm going to switch to faces mode, so number 3 on that top row. Select these faces here, holding down the shift key, select these faces, and holding down the shift key, select these faces as well. So they're all selected. I've got panels selected for the material, and then I'm going to hit assign. And you can see they're now assigned that material, whereas the rest is still got that body material. So then with these faces still selected, or reselect them if you haven't, let's just reselect them, assuming you've accidentally deselected them. I'm going to come over here to this sidebar here, and I'm going to select the Extrude Region tool. That's E on the keyboard for the shortcut. So select the Extrude Region. You see we've got this control here. I'm just going to swivel around a little bit so it's easier to see, and then I'm just going to drag that, and you can see we're creating an extrusion. Now I don't actually want this extrusion like this, it's kind of pushing out all in the same direction, and that doesn't look quite right to me. So I'm going to undo that, Control Z or Command Z, and I'm going to come up here, this menu here, and instead of median point, I'm going to select individual origins. And then if I drag to extrude, you can see that we've now got an extrusion happening in the direction of those faces, which looks much more natural. So again, in our pop-up menu here, I'm just going to set that value to 0.025 to be absolutely precise. There you go. So the problem with our model at this point is it is made up of too few faces, so it's going to look very sort of polygonal. And we can fix that by coming out of edit mode. Now remember that tab is the shortcut for that. So tab switches in and out of edit mode. I just want you to notice that if you're not over the viewport, so you're here for example, I'm hitting the tab key like crazy but nothing happens. I have to be over the viewport for the tab key to work properly. So as I say, I want to be in object mode, and then I want to come to the wrench icon here, the modifier properties. And I'm going to click add modifier. Search, and what I'm going to search for, I'm going to type S, and it brings up subdivision surface, or you could type the whole word if you want, subdivision surface. So that's given us this menu here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase that viewport levels up to 2, so it's the same as the render levels. So something a bit odd's gone on here, but what's actually happened is that we've actually got more polygons, and this is going to be smoother, but obviously it's distorted our nice little panels. So I'm going to do two things, one of which is that I'm going to right click and I'm going to select Shade Auto Smooth from the menu. And you may or may not be able to see that that has actually made it a lot smoother. In fact, pretty much completely smooth. So then what we need to consider is how we're going to get our panels back into the right shape. Again, we need to switch out of object mode into edit mode. We can use the tab key for that, as I say. And what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the loop cut tool, this one here. The shortcut for that is Control R. So select that, and you'll notice that if I hover over the model, I get these lines. So I'm going to hover till I've got this line here. And I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and I'm going to drag all the way up until I can't go any further. And let go. And you'll see that that's sharpened up that edge. So I'm going to do the same here. Drag with the middle mouse button all the way down. Same thing here. Drag up, same thing here, drag down, same thing here, drag up and drag down. So this is already looking a lot better. We need to address the sides though, so I'm going to select here and then drag left all the way and then select here and drag all the way right. And I'm going to just come out of this by reselecting the selection tool. So now we've got a very nice smooth object, but also those nice crisp panels. So we've got the best of both worlds by using this subdivision modifier. What I also want to do is I want to add an additional modifier. So click Add Modifier, and I don't actually need to do a search because the one I want is Solidify, that one there. And if I come to the side view, you can see if I toggle that on and off, I can do it by clicking on this little screen icon here. You can see that I'm just adding a little bit of depth to it. So it's not a completely flat surface. So I'm just going to increase that thickness to 0.02, I think, just so we've got a nice bit of thickness like that, looking pretty good, I think. So what we can do is we can just close that up like that, and we can also close that up like that. Just makes life a little bit tidier. So now we want this to be a complete sphere. So again, let's tab out of edit mode or use this menu here. And again, in modifiers, I want to click Add Modifier and I want to select Array. So there's the beginnings of our array. What we actually want is a radial array. Now, for some reason, Blender doesn't yet have a built-in radial array. So the first step to doing this is we need to come to the Add menu. We need to select Empty and Plane Axes, or any one of these will do actually, but let's select Plane Axes. And then we need to come back to our sphere. You can select any object by highlighting it in the outliner view here. And instead of relative offset for this array modifier, we need to select Object Offset. And then we open up this little menu. And from this drop down here, we can select that empty that we've just made. So now that's selected, I'm going to have a count of 8. Still nothing's happened, and that's because we need to come back to our empty and we need to rotate it on the Z-axis by 45 degrees. And now we've got our sphere. And 45 degrees is obviously 360 divided by 8. We've got 8 segments, and that's why we need this rotation. You'll notice, of course, that Blender uses Z for the vertical axis rather than the depth axis. The depth axis is in fact Y. It's a little bit confusing until you get used to it. So let's come back to our sphere. I just want to show you something that is going to be a problem unless we address it. Let's come to Object Properties, this one here, and eventually we'll want to be able to rotate our sphere. So we'll want to rotate it on Z. So I'm just going to drag in this Z field, and you can see the problem we've got. Because of that array modifier, this rotation is not working correctly. So what we need to do is come back to the wrench icon, the modifier properties, and we need to move this array above everything else. We can just drag this like that till it's at the top. Just going to open it back up again, and with it selected, so click on it, I'm going to hit Control and A, and you can see it disappears. And now that has actually applied that modifier. So if I come back to Object Properties and we do that Z rotation again, we're all good. So the final thing I want to do in this step is to look back at the materials. Let us come down to the material properties here. So let's first of all work on the body. We want this to be glass. So instead of principled BSDF for this surface here, let's select from this menu Glass BSDF. And there's a little bit of setup we need to do. And what we need to do is we need to come up here to the render properties. This is this sort of TV up here. And this glass shader doesn't actually work in the default Eevee renderer. And we need to switch to cycles, like so. And I'm going to switch to GPU compute because it makes everything much faster. I'm also going to switch the viewport max samples to 8, and I'm going to do the same with the render, like so. So it's still not looking quite like glass, but that's because we need to come back down to the material properties down here. The problem is the roughness is too extreme for it to look like glass, or rather it's looking like extremely frosted glass because it's too rough. So if we set that to, say, 0.1, or even 0 if you wanted, but I'm going to go for 0.1, so it's got a little bit of roughness. You can see that now we've actually got something that looks like glass. So coming back down to the material properties, let's select the panels material. This base color, let's just take out almost all the saturation like that. And let's turn the metallic all the way up. And let's have a roughness of, say, 0.2. And now they're kind of shiny metal. That looks much sexier. So what if we now want to render it? Let's just line ourselves up till we've got a view that we like. In actual fact, let's just simply come to the front view like that. And what we need to do is we need to line the camera up to this view. And we can do that by coming to View and Align View and Align Active Camera to View. And that pops us into the camera view, and we're looking at something a little bit more useful than the default camera view. So then let's select the camera by clicking on it in the outliner and then coming down to Object Properties. We can just zero it out on X. Let's also zero it out on Z, so it's completely in the center. And then we can just play with that Y value till we're framed up a little bit better. So 5.7, something like that, doesn't really matter. And then what we can do is we can come to Render and Render Image. And you can see it looks like this. So then I just want to do one quick little final fix, and that's come to the light here. Again, I'm using the outliner to select it. And let's just reset its location on X, Y, and Z. And we can do that easily. If we hover over these numbers, I can just hit the backspace key, and you'll see that all those numbers go to 0. And now our light is right there in the middle of the object. And if I now render, you can see it's all looking a lot different. So we've got a bit of frosting because I didn't set that roughness of the glass material down to 0. So you can play with that to taste. You may also decide that you want that light to have some color. So you can click on this light bulb here, the light data. Let's just turn the power down to 500 watts. And let's just give it any old color really, it doesn't really matter. And let's render image again. And that color gives us a bit more visual interest. So I think that's going to be it for part 1. We obviously need to build some more geometry for the inside, and we can do that in the next part if you're interested. So hope that's been interesting. Thanks very much indeed for watching. See you again soon.